Hey friends, welcome back to the Lifestyle School podcast. I am so glad that you're here today because we're diving into a topic that affects so many women and definitely some men, often silently and often with a lot of shame attached. And that is anxiety. But today we're going to reframe it in a way that's going to feel hopefully like a breath of fresh air, maybe like a deep breath for your nervous system. I want to introduce you to a phrase that I heard. I'm not 100% sure where it's from, but it said anxiety is a signal, not an identity. And today I want to take you into what that actually means. And part of my drive to do this is I feel like we live in a society that's all about like putting labels, right, on absolutely everything. And I think it's a social media thing. It's, I am this, I'm that, and we're trying to like label ourselves as whatever, especially when it comes to things around like mental health and our mental state. And I think this can be like a really big stumbling block when it comes to becoming the person that we want to be, when it comes to our health, when it comes to our weight, and then when it comes to like what we want to actually achieve in life, right? And I think this phrase that anxiety is a signal, not an identity, is a really, really important step in this process because the truth is, anxiety is not who you are, right? Even if you do deal with anxiety, it's not your personality, it's not your destiny, it's a message. It's truly a communication. It's your body and brain trying to get your attention. And when you learn how to speak that language, when you learn how to interpret the signal instead of internalizing it, I think you have the ability to unlock so much freedom. So, um, I want to help you, hopefully, through this conversation today, un- excuse me, unlock some clarity, maybe unlock some confidence, and hopefully help you stop feeling ruled by something that was never meant to define you. And if you are someone who has described yourself as an anxious person, maybe for years, maybe your whole life, this episode might be the first step towards separating your identity from your symptoms. And now, as always, guys, before we get into it, a quick disclaimer. I'm not a medical doctor. And this is not medical advice. This podcast is for educational purposes only. And always consult with a qualified healthcare professional if you have any major concerns about your health and before making any major changes. With that, guys, let's get into it. So, I want to start with the most important reframe is that anxiety is data, it's information, it's a response. It's not a personality trait. Okay. I'll say that again. Anxiety is not a personality trait. Somewhere along the way, I think many women and sometimes men, but I feel like I noticed this in women more. We started absorbing the identity of like, I'm just an anxious person, right? And maybe it came from our childhood. Maybe it came from a really stressful period of life that never fully reset. Or maybe this is, a culture that labels everything and convinces you that the way you feel today is how you're going to feel forever. But anxiety is simply your body saying something needs attention. And really, that's it. It's like the check engine light in your car, right? And when the light comes on, you don't assume that the whole car is doomed. I mean, maybe if you have a really old, crappy car, maybe, but I would say for most people, if you're driving a relatively decent car, that check engine light comes on and you're not like, oh, the whole car is going to blow up, right? Or that it's like fundamentally flawed, you get curious, right? You investigate, you ask, okay, like what needs to do? You take it to the car repair shop, you have them run a diagnostic and see what needs to be fixed. And anxiety is doing the same thing. And it's not trying to ruin your life. It's not trying to embarrass you. It's not proof that you're weak. It is your internal system trying to protect you. And when we can start to see anxiety as a messenger instead of an identity, we stop fighting ourselves and we stop personalizing the signal and start working with it. And that is my hope that, through this conversation, we can start to do. So now I want to zoom out and talk a little bit about the biological side of what anxiety actually is. And so let's zoom out for a second and look at what it actually looks like from a biological standpoint. When your brain perceives something as a threat, whether it's real danger or mental, maybe emotional or physiological, your nervous system switches into a protective state, right? The amygdala lights up, your cortisol rises, adrenaline starts circulating, and your heart rate picks up. Your breathing changes, your digestive system slows down, and your body's preparing to deal with something, right? And this happens in milliseconds, faster than your conscious mind can even interpret it. So, what you call anxiety is often just your nervous system saying, hey, something feels off, something isn't safe. And here's the kicker: the nervous system doesn't distinguish between physical danger and emotional discomfort, right? The body reacts the same way. So, whether you're out on a hike and you encounter a bear, or you get a harsh text message from someone you really care about, or maybe you make poor food choices and your blood sugar drops really quickly, you have a blood sugar crash, or maybe you have a fight with your spouse or significant other and you have unresolved conflict. Maybe you had 4 cups of coffee on an empty stomach first thing in the morning, or you haven't slept for a week, or maybe you've spent way too much time doom scrolling on your phone, right? Or it could just even be a story you're telling yourself in your head. Your body responds to all of these different situations the same way. And this is why the experience of anxiety can feel so confusing, right? Because it shows up in the body before it shows up in our mind, even sometimes, right? But the good news is, if your nervous system learned these patterns, it can also unlearn them, right? I'm going to say that again, because I think sometimes we think, oh, if I'm dealing with this now, I'm going to deal with it forever. But that's just not reality. And um, that's a really horrible way to look at life, unfortunately. So your nervous system learned these patterns, unfortunately. But the good news is it can also unlearn them. Okay. And now I'm um so now I'm going here because this connection is massive and people are not talking about it enough when it comes to the connection between metabolic health and anxiety. Okay, a huge percentage of anxiety symptoms are metabolically connected. So, I gave you all those like examples of sleep deprivation, blood sugar crashes, um, too much caffeine. A huge percentage of these anxiety symptoms can be metabolically related. So it can be blood sugar driven, it can be sleep driven, it can be protein driven, it can be caffeine driven, and it can be inflammation driven. So here is what I mean. When your blood sugar crashes, even slightly sometimes, your body releases adrenaline to bring it back up. And that adrenaline rush feels like anxiety sometimes. And it feels like, maybe shaking, irritability, maybe a little panic or restlessness. It could feel like a tight chest, intrusive thoughts, or even emotional sensitivity. And when you're under eating protein and living in a carb heavy pattern, your brain struggles to make stable neurotransmitters, and this allows anxiety to go up, unfortunately. And when you're not sleeping, which is a huge problem, I would say almost 100% of the clients that I work with one on one of the biggest things that we're talking about every week when I check in is their sleep. Because if you're not sleeping, your amygdala is 60% more reactive the next day. And go figure, that's going to make your anxiety go up, right? And when you drink caffeine, or especially too much, depending on your sensitivity on an empty stomach, that can also make your anxiety go up. So you got to be careful with caffeine. And when your body is inflamed, again, that's going to help perpetuate anxiety. And millions of people think that, they have a physiological anxiety issue when they actually have sorry, I said physiological. I think I meant psychological issue. Excuse me, with anxiety. But it's actually a physiological one. So it's not psychological, it's physiological. And the fix isn't to like calm down, it's not to try harder. And, I I don't like to comment on medications very much, but it isn't necessarily something that you maybe need medication for, because you can fix it. Like the medication isn't going to affect the metabolic root of the issue, right? Sometimes people need to go on medication, and so I'm not making any recommendations on that. I want to be very clear. I want to stay in my lane because I am not a physician. But we got to get down to the metabolic root of the matter and address that if that is the driving factor of this anxiety that you've been dealing with, right? And I want you to see this as empowering because you can change this. You can support your body in a way that reduces the intensity of the signal so that the emotional load feels lighter. And I think if we're being honest, that's what we all want, right? Especially if you've ever dealt with anxiety in any real way. So let's talk about the identity part of this, right? Because this part matters, I think, more than I think we let ourselves think, right? And I think a lot of times we don't even think about the identity part of this, but this is huge. There's a huge difference between saying, like, I feel anxious today and I'm an anxious person, because one is a temporary experience and the other is a permanent identity you've claimed. And we have to be very careful with what we claim about ourselves, right? And hopefully that's something that you have started to realize on this journey. And the identity becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the more you say it, the more you reinforce it, and the more your brain searches for evidence that it's true, right? Like once you learn something new, your brain is always looking for things to come back and reinforce that belief. And so I want you to catch the language that you use. You don't have an anxious identity. You have anxious moments. You maybe have an anxious response or maybe an anxious signal, but that is all that it is, right? A moment, a response, a signal, and it's not you. It's not your identity. It's not your character. It's not your destiny. It's not who you're going to be for your whole life, unless that's something that you want to choose, right? So we have to divorce the identity part of this. And if anxiety has been part of your story, that still doesn't mean that it's your identity. It means your body and your brain have been trying to communicate something for a long time. And my hope is that as you've been on this process of personal growth, of health, you're reconnecting with your body in a meaningful way. You're getting out of autopilot and you're finally listening to what your body's trying to say. And so let's go deeper into the signal, right? So if anxiety is a messenger, what is it trying to say? And sometimes that signal is you're overwhelmed. You've overcommitted yourself. Like there's too much on your plate. Maybe there's just too much going on. Maybe you haven't been taking the time to slow down. Maybe you're overcommitted, right? You got to just cut things out. Maybe you're underfueled. You haven't been eating enough. You haven't been getting enough protein or like real whole foods. You've been living on carbs or little pieces of food off of your kid's plate. Maybe you've been ignoring your emotions. This is one that I have historically been really, really bad at. Oh, I should say I've been really good at ignoring my emotions, which results in bad things. But maybe you're living out of alignment with your values, right? Or maybe you're carrying things that aren't yours, or you're portraying your boundaries, or maybe you're just totally disconnected from yourself. And I think for a lot of people, we're just totally disconnected from ourselves because we live in this fast-paced world and we've got these little supercomputers in our hand that are constantly distracting us and keeping us numb, right? And the other times, the signal or the message that anxiety is trying to tell us is that it's like actually a physical one, like, oh, you need to eat food, period, right? Maybe you need more protein. Maybe you need water. Maybe you need sleep or movement or just like to sit down and do some deep breathing. Those are all super legit, right? Or maybe the signal could be relational. Excuse me. I just muted my microphone because I had to cough again. And maybe it's telling you that the dynamic of your relationship isn't healthy, whether that's with a partner, with a family member, a friend. Maybe it means that you don't feel heard in that relationship. Maybe it means that you're feeling like you have to shrink yourself to be in this relationship. Maybe it's telling you that you're trying to please everyone and it's not working out. Or maybe you're just abandoning yourself for peace. Anxiety often shows up when something is out of alignment and in your habits, in your health, your relationships, or your beliefs. If you are living out of alignment, that is going to cause a level of discomfort and it might even show up as anxiety. And when you start asking, what is this signal trying to tell me instead of what is wrong with me, everything shifts, right? Because you move from a place of like, why is this happening to like why me to like taking agency in the situation. And we have agency if we choose to pay attention, to listen, and to take action. And, we also can't talk about this issue of anxiety without acknowledging the environment that we're all living in, right? And, I've made reference to this, but, I think we're mostly all pretty overstimulated, right? Between the phones in our hands, the TVs in our houses, just our go, go, go mentality. We're likely under rested, as I mentioned when I work with clients, I'm always trying to talk to them like, we got to get better sleep habits, sleep hygiene. We got to go to bed at the same time. We got to wake up at the same time every day. Like we have to get adequate hours of sleep, right? For many people, we're over caffeinated, we're undernourished. We live in this digital world. Our nervous system was never designed for. And if you watched a movie like The Social Network, you see all these executives talking about how they helped create all these apps that we use on our phone. And then they talk about how they don't let their kids use them because they know how addictive they are and how horrible they are for their mental health, right? And their nervous system. We don't transition also between tasks anymore. And this is one that I have felt very convicted by. We're always multitasking. And, I try to explain to my husband sometimes, I feel like there's like a dozen web browsers open in my brain at any given moment. And I'm trying to do, six things at once, and it results in, six things being like a quarter done or not even half done. Sometimes I get things, done, but I do so much better when I shut down all the other tabs and I just do one thing at a time, right? But that is a real thing about our environment is we're always multitasking and we don't sit in silence, right? We don't sit in silence and breathe deeply. And I think a lot of us also have a hard time taking breaks, right? And this culture that we have created is anxious. Like this is going to foster, and it's like a cesspool, for anxiety to grow. But the truth of the matter is we don't have to choose to participate in this. Like being overstimulated, underrested, overcaffeinated, undernourished, all of these things, like we don't have to do that. Like we have agency in our life. And I think sometimes we just take life as it comes at us. Like we are moving through life as it comes at us and we're not what's the word? Like intentionally taking the time to build the architecture of our life to foster what we want, right? We're just living living through it and kind of letting it happen to us. Like we need to happen to our environment and our lifestyle if we want to move out of like anxiety and into peace and rest and health, truly. Because you can choose a different path. You can choose to slow down, right? That is a choice. You don't have to do a million activities. You don't have to say yes to everything. You can choose to slow down. You can choose to prioritize nourishment. You can choose boundaries, right? And you can choose environments that support your nervous system instead of suffocating it. And, choosing these things can be really hard. We talked about the process of shedding things on this journey. And I mean, that is so much part of this, right? But the thing is we get to choose and you get to choose what do you want for your life, right? I think about that scene from The Notebook where Noah is, I think her name's Allie, saying like, "What do you want?" It's like a famous meme, like, "What do you want?" And she's like, "I don't know. I don't know." She's like, "What do you want?" And she's like, "I don't know." It's like we have to know what we want. And then we have to be really firm about it. And then we have to make the intentional choices to move then down that path towards what we want. Because being healthy in this day and age is not going to happen on accident. We have to make space, make room, and move with intention towards that. And, sometimes anxiety isn't signaling a real issue. Sometimes it's signaling an old issue, and that is something to also be like mindful of. Your nervous system can get stuck in patterns, and, maybe you went through a really stressful season years ago and your body learned from that to stay on alert. I don't know if I've shared this on the podcast, but I know I have on my social media. We lived in a rental house, unfortunately, for 9 months that had a huge issue with drug dealers just parking in front of our house and dealing drugs, like right there, 10 feet from our driveway. All these men that looked very sketchy coming and going at all hours of the day and night. And we didn't have a garage, and the access to our laundry room was outside. And, it just led to all sorts of like nervous system anxiety issues for me. And, what I have found now, it's been over 6 months since we lived there, excuse me, that if I like there's things that will happen and I'll just feel like this snap and my nervous system like picks up. It's like, oh no, like what are these people doing? I'm now on alert. I can feel my cortisol rise, the adrenaline starts going, I can feel that response. And so, I mean, this is like a real thing. These are patterns that maybe we have to unlearn because you went through a stressful season. Maybe it was years ago, maybe it was a year ago, 6 months ago, but your body learned to stay on alert. And with that, which was also funny about, not funny, but interesting about that story is when we moved into our new place, where we weren't dealing with drug dealers all the time, I realized, there was like a week or two when we first moved where I caught myself constantly like looking out the window, checking who was in the street. And then I would be like, why am I looking out the window? There's literally nothing to see. There's like no one coming and going. We live in like a super quiet neighborhood now, which is such a blessing. But it was like my body had learned to stay alert and I had to rethink these patterns, right? And, maybe you had chaos growing up and your nervous system never got the memo that, life is safe now. And maybe you've been in survival mode for so long that safety feels unfamiliar. And, this is what we would call a false alarm. And the brain thinks danger is present when it's not. And again, I want to say, even though this has been something that you've been experiencing for so long, it's still not your identity. It's a pattern. And patterns can be retrained. And this is why, and sometimes, I'll be perfectly honest, I think therapy can be such an amazing tool also to work through some of this stuff. So if you've thought about doing therapy, um, I had a really great experience in therapy. I did therapy for about a year, unrelated to the living in the drug house. We call it the drug house. It sounds horrible, but living in that house, it was totally separate from that. But I had a really good experience with therapy, and I think finding the right therapist is critical for to be a good experience. But these patterns can be trained. Sometimes we do need some extra help, though, if we have like really long held patterns that need to be disrupted. But doing things like walking can help, eating protein, weight training, having structure and routines, journaling, doing things like cold exposure can help because I think part of this too is like learning that we can do hard things, right? And even like fasting can be like one of those things as well. Like, doing something that's hard intentionally helps, build that resilience within ourselves. Having community is super helpful, setting boundaries, and, being honest with yourself is super important, with this process. And these tools reteach the nervous system what safety feels like. And we have to be intentional about reshaping the patterns that we've lived in, maybe for, a couple of months or maybe years and years and years. And so here's a part that might sting a tiny bit when we're talking about anxiety, but it's also where freedom begins. Sometimes anxiety is the signal that we're avoiding something. And, that can be hard, right? Maybe we're avoiding a conversation. Maybe we're avoiding making a decision. Maybe we're avoiding the truth, right? Or maybe we're avoiding our own needs. And the anxiety is the pressure building from that avoidance. And when you turn toward the thing that you've been running from, that anxiety actually loses power and it dissolves it and it helps kind of settle it. I don't know if you've ever had, a really hard conversation that you need to have and, that feeling of like dread before you have it, but then you have it and you feel so much better, usually, like because you got it out there and what's done is done. Avoidance is like trying to hold a beach ball underwater and eventually, it pops up and usually at the worst time. And the beauty of it though is facing the thing that you're avoiding releases the pressure, right? And it brings so much freedom. So let's talk about, the practical side. Let me give you some practical ideas of um, how can we reduce anxiety for the long term? Because really, this is where the power lies. So things that you should evaluate. I'm just going to like list off a bunch of things here when it comes to helping prevent feelings of anxiousness, of, anxiety is number one, you got to stabilize your blood sugar. It's really connected to your mental health. And it's going to really change how you feel if you're not on the blood sugar roller coaster all day, every day, right? And a big part of that is making sure you're getting sufficient protein. So 20, 30 grams minimum at the start of every meal would be a really great place for most people to start. And you can build from there. And, some people are going to need more. I would say I don't think anyone's probably going to need less than that. Sorry, still dealing with this cold, guys. I have this like lingering cough that's really frustrating. But back to things that are going to help reduce our anxiety long-term is stabilizing our blood sugar, making sure we're prioritizing and getting sufficient protein. Because, even amino acids are essential for our brain health. We have to have better sleep hygiene. Huge issue for most people. We got to strength train. We have to walk. I think doing things like cold exposure, it's not for everyone, but I think it can be a really powerful tool. A big one is just decluttering our schedules, right? Um, like say no, set boundaries, plan your routines, find a meaningful connection with people who you enjoy. Um, be honest with yourself about, where you need to make these changes. Self-honesty is such an important part of this process. And, start to construct a lifestyle that supports your nervous system, right? And, find a mindset that supports the identity that is in alignment with the life and the health that you want, right? Because anxiety, is only going to calm down when your biology feels safe and when your identity feels grounded. So I want to end with this. You are not an anxious person. You are a human whose body has been sending out signals. Okay. And you're on this path and you're learning to hear them, right? You're learning to decode these signals. You're learning to respond without judgment, hopefully. And you're learning to choose a new identity and one that is calm, hopefully, one that's grounded, and then one that feels really capable of change. And, anxiety might be part of your experience right now, but it's not who you are. And I want you to truly hear me say that. You are allowed to outgrow it. You are allowed to heal from it. And you're allowed to step into a version of yourself that feels steady and safe. And your anxiety is not your identity. It is just a signal. And hopefully you're learning to listen to that signal. So before we wrap up today, I want to leave you with one simple truth. You were never meant to carry anxiety as an identity, and your body isn't malfunctioning. You're not, quote, too much or too sensitive or wired wrong. You're a human with a nervous system that's been doing its best to protect you with the tools that it's had, right? And now you hopefully have new tools after listening to this podcast, and you have new understanding and you have a new awareness of how your biology and your habits and relationships and beliefs all influence the way that your body speaks to you. And that's the gift of this work, truly, is once you learn to decode the signal, you stop feeling afraid of it, right? And you stop personalizing it and you stop letting it dictate the story you tell about yourself. And anxiety just becomes something you can observe and respond to instead of something that really feels all consuming. So, as you go into your week, I want you to practice this simple shift. When you feel that tightening in your chest or that relentlessness that your brain is spinning, I want you to pause and ask, what is this trying to tell me? What is this feeling trying to tell me? Not, what is wrong with me? Like, why can't I handle life? Like, I want you to reframe that and ask, like, what is this signal pointing me to? That question alone moves you from being powerless to powerful and having agency, and it connects you to your body instead of pulling you into fear. And it helps you take aligned action instead of spiraling into shame about being a quote, anxious person, right? And listen, if today's episode hit home for you, if you felt seen or validated or encouraged, I want you to know that, you're not alone in this. You are doing the brave work of reconnecting with yourself, of rebuilding trust with your body, or, you're even doing this like beautiful work of rewriting the identity that you want to live with and from. And that work really matters. And it will change not only your health, but your whole life. And so with that, guys, I want to say thank you so much for being here. Thank you for choosing growth. I just love to grow together. I'm on my own growth journey. Thank you for showing up for yourself in a world that, is constantly pulling you away from your ability to improve yourself. And so with that, guys, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do so. Leave a review, leave a comment, share it with a friend. I would feel so honored. And with that, we'll see you next week. Until then, remember, guys, anxiety is a signal. It's not your identity. And you are the one writing your story now. So with that, guys, we'll see you next time on the Lifestyle School podcast.